So a couple of reminders about decorum. During the core panel, everyone's mics and cameras will be off with the exception of our panelists and moderators. And we've disabled the chat function. We'll turn all of those functions back on at the end for our Q&A portion, where you can feel free to raise your hand, turn your camera on, ask questions, or leave them in the chat, and we can read them out as well. We have a fantastic lineup for today's panel. I'm very excited about these incredible women. We have Dr. Susan Reid here, who is the past chair of the Department of Surgery at McMaster University, who specializes in surgical education and breast cancer. We have Dr. Janet Pritchard, who is an assistant professor at the School of Interdisciplinary Sciences at McMaster University, whose research involves the assessment of frailty in clinical practice. We have Dr. Rebecca Gilmour, who is an assistant professor at the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Mount Royal University, whose work applies biomechanical methods to understand the risk for and the long-term consequences of pathological conditions. And we have Dr. Juliet Daniel, who is a professor and cancer biologist at the Department of Biology at McMaster University, who specializes in cell adhesion and signaling through transcription factors, particularly the transcription factor Kaizo. And Dr. Daniel is also the acting associate dean of research and external relations in the Faculty of Science at McMaster. So we're going to get started. For each question, we're going to go alphabetically, which means we will start with Dr. Daniel and we'll finish with Dr. Reid. So first question, what is your educational background and how did it lead you to where you are today?
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's session, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to share my journey with you. So I was born and raised in Barbados, and I did all my primary and secondary education there. And then from Barbados, I came to Canada to go to university, and I went to Queen's University and for my bachelor's in life sciences and my PhD, I moved to UBC because the novelty of snow and coal had worn off by then. But what led me to where I am today is actually, I would say, began in Barbados. I was always interested and curious about the natural world. And, that I was that kid that would always ask, why are the sunflowers pink? Why are some yellow? Why? Like I had all the whys. There was no internet then, so you couldn't just go onto Wikipedia or Google the answers to any of those questions. And so I was always interested in nature but I was also very good at English and geography. I was passionate about, I just love learning. However, in high school, one teacher never liked my interpretation of Shakespeare, even though the question said, how do you interpret? I knew what interpret meant, but she didn't like my interpretations. Mm-hmm. And so that pretty much steered me away from languages and literature and towards the sciences, because I knew that, E equals MC squared, and that couldn't be changed. It wasn't interpretive. It was definitive. So that kind of, in Barbados, you still had to take English to finish high school, but my trajectory was definitely then focused on the sciences. I was really, really good at math and physics, hated biology because I didn't like squirmy things and blood. But no one ever encouraged me to pursue engineering or any career where I would use a physics degree or a math degree. And I was the first person from my family that exhibited academic aptitude. So everyone was sure that I would go to university. And so everyone was like, well, maybe you should go to med school and be a doctor. And I was like, oh God, blood, gory frogs and all that stuff you have to do. I did anyway. But because I was the first person from my family that was going to go to university, it was like, okay, I'll go to pre-med at Queen's. And my family saved and scrounged and were able to send me to Canada to go to university. And at Queen's, that's where I learned about all these other career options, actually. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew I wanted to do research that had a global impact and would make a difference in the world. And I wanted to do research and get a Nobel Prize. That was my teenage dream. Had no idea how I was going to do it. But my last year of my undergrad, the stars aligned, I guess. And my next door neighbor in Barbados died of breast cancer. Then a month later, my mom was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And I think the same month, one of my instructors came into class excited about the discovery of oncogenes and how they could totally revolutionize cancer research and we'd have a cure. And her enthusiasm was so contagious that it was like, maybe cancer research is what I should do. So pretty much that was, I would say, the deciding factor for me becoming a cancer biologist. And that's led me to where I am today.
I think that sounds amazing. I don't know how I can follow that. I think I'm next. I grew up in British Columbia in the Okanagan Valley, and I don't know how early on to start. I always kind of knew what I wanted to do. I'm a bioarchaeologist. I'm an anthropologist who specializes in studying human skeletal remains from archaeological contexts. And so growing up, I was always really interested in history and in the past. And right after high school, I was accepted as a Rotary Youth Exchange student, and I went and I spent a year in Vienna and learned how to speak German. And I went only knowing one sentence: "I'm afraid of snowflakes," thinking that this is something silly and stupid and I'll make friends really easily. And being in Vienna just kind of hooked me on this history, this archaeology, and sort of humans living in other contexts and other cultures in the past. So I came back from that and I did a year at a community college, or a university college it was called at the time, because I'm the first person in my family to go to university. And so I didn't really know how to apply. I didn't really know when to apply. I missed all the deadlines. The only thing that was left was local at-home community college. It was fine. It was great. I did that for a year, and I actually had some of the most engaged instructors ever during that year. And in my first year of post-secondary, I was out collecting sediment samples from the bottom of a lake as a research assistant on different geological projects. So it was a really neat experience that actually launched me, and they helped me transfer to Simon Fraser, where I did my undergraduate in archaeology. They've got an archaeology only department there. And then from there, I did my master's at Durham University in the UK, and did research in Budapest on Roman period skeletal remains and trauma and injuries. And interspersed between my master's and my PhD, I did various archaeological research projects. I worked on the Arabian Peninsula, and I worked at doing contract archaeology, which is before you build a house or a road, you have to go and make sure that all the cultural remains have been removed from the site first. So I did that in Austria and in the UK. And then I got accepted for my PhD, and I did my PhD at McMaster in the anthropology department at Mac, where I studied Roman period skeletons and long-term consequences of injuries, and using biomechanical methods to reconstruct bone loss and activity, and try and say something about a person's physical experience after their injuries, after their trauma, after their fractures. So after that, I did some time. I worked at Humber for a while, and then I was hired back at Mac as an assistant professor for a few years. And I've just recently moved. I started a new job as assistant professor at Mount Royal University out here in Calgary. So I feel like I went through that really quick and not as lovely and detailed as my predecessor, but that's kind of where I'm at today. My degrees are predominantly in archaeology and anthropology, but I take a health and well-being and disease type approach to the type of work that I do.
Cool.
All right, good afternoon. I'm going to try to wow you guys like the others have just wowed you with an incredible background story. And looking at the participant list, I noticed a few people that I have taught in the past, Febby, including you. Hello, it's nice to see your face. And so maybe I'll try to share with you some nuggets of information that I haven't said to my classes, just to make this a little bit more entertaining. As was mentioned in the introduction, I'm an assistant professor in the School of Interdisciplinary Science, and my job primarily entails teaching. So each year I teach 6 classes, predominantly in the life science program. However, I just came from a joint appointment where I was split in life science and kinesiology. But now I'm fully housed in life science program. I was just trying to reflect on how exactly I got here this morning, and it's been a bit of a windy road. But I think that I've arrived at my career maybe a little bit faster than some other people my age, perhaps. But it has been a windy road, and I've kind of taken some detours along the way. So I did an undergrad at the University of Guelph in the human kinetics program. And some people might think, professors have it all figured out. And, I think while Juliet was kind of describing nicely that she was inspired and really interested in science early on, and maybe that was one way that she knew she would be a professor later on in life. But when I entered at the University of Guelph to do an undergrad in human kinetics, I was so confused, so madly confused about what the heck I was going to do with my life, that the summer before going to undergrad, I was actually ready to go to the University of Waterloo into the environment and business program. And I was all set to play basketball at the University of Waterloo. So I was recruited there and I was all set to play. I had even had a sweatshirt mailed to me in the mail, Waterloo right across the chest. And I was all set to be a Waterloo warrior. And I did this about face, and I think it was about July or August, which I think would have made the coach really, really upset at me. But I kind of pivoted and I decided, you know what, I want to study human beings. I don't want to study the environment and business. Although I'm very passionate about environment issues as well, but thinking about kind of what would give me the most satisfying career, I really believe in physical activity and good nutrition as parts of whole human health. So I just felt like this was more of a natural fit. And so I pivoted from an environment and business program to human kinetics, two very different fields. So for people out there who, maybe you're a little bit confused about what direction you're going to take, just because even and other people who have great jobs have experienced confusion. And I think experiencing that confusion kind of helped me figure out what path I want to take to make me happier. So anyways, I pursued an undergrad in human kinetics. And one of the things I tell my students a little bit about is the value of volunteering, doing things that make you happy, not volunteering for the sake of putting something on your CV, but volunteering for the sake of something that makes you happy. And I did this during my undergrad, and an experience that I had with Osteoporosis Canada as a speaker in the community directly led me to my master's and PhD and postdoc positions, which provided me so many amazing opportunities that have, basically led me to my job today. So my experience as a volunteer education speaker for Osteoporosis Canada, that's something I got involved in my second year of undergrad. It directly led me to my position that I took as a graduate student. And maybe I can tell you guys a little bit more later on about the little detours that I took. I was also a volunteer at one point in a special needs classroom in a kindergarten room as I was completing a fourth year thesis looking at leptin resistance in rats. So I was massively confused even in my fourth year as well. Anyways, after I finished at the University of Guelph, I took a little bit of time to try to think of where I wanted to be, and I traveled a little bit. I went to Italy by myself, and I ate really amazing food, and I drank some really great wine, which was an awesome experience. Traveling on your own, I think, as a woman, you kind of learn a lot more about yourself than you thought you possibly could. And when I finished that trip, I realized I really wanted to spend time in research, in clinical research. And I've always been motivated by research and aging. And I found a supervisor who provided me with so many great opportunities, Dr. Alexandra Papuanu. And so she invited me to complete a master's and then a PhD with her in the medical science program at McMaster. A wonderful program, and I can speak more about it if people are interested. And I did end up going on to do a postdoc with her as well in a bit of a different topic, but I decided to stay with her in the lab. And I worked at Humber as well. So Rebecca, maybe we have crossed paths at some point. I took on a teaching professor role at Humber College in the University of Guelph Humber. But I always just felt connected to McMaster. And during my grad school, I created a lot of connections with other profs on campus and even students. And while I was working at Humber, I found myself continuing to look for opportunities at Mac, and even stay involved in projects with faculty at Mac. And so that kind of told me that I wanted to be back at McMaster. So I was so excited when a teaching role came up. I still do research projects, but I am quite passionate about teaching, and I love to teach students about some of the things that I did in research as well, with the hope of exciting students about getting more involved in the aging sciences, because we know, there's a tsunami of aging happening in Canada, and we need to have really excited, invigorated people working in the field of aging. So that's one of my missions in teaching. So happy to kind of continue to tell you a little bit more about my educational path as we go through the questions.
Wow, that's so interesting to hear everybody's paths and stories and education. And one thing that really resonates with me is that, it's not a straight line. It is always a little bit of a zigzag and sometimes a bit of a circle. It seems life gets in the way sometimes of the plans that you thought that you had laid out for yourself. And sometimes they turn out to be opportunities that point you in a different direction. And I've certainly experienced that. So I grew up in Toronto. My father was a family doctor, and I was one of 7 children. And I went to public school. I went to a public high school in the 70s. And I went to university. Initially, I went to the University of Guelph for 1 term only. And I was registered in the early childhood education program. I thought I had a job, one of many jobs while I was in high school, working in an early childhood center. And I thought maybe that's what I wanted to do. Although when I was in school, I always loved biology and math and the sciences and had done very well in those. And we had a family illness, so I couldn't stay at Guelph. I came home to be supportive at home. And I gave me a few months then to really think about, is that really the degree that I wanted to pursue? And, what was the future going to look like for me there? And I had some time to really think again about what I wanted to take at university. And because I still wanted to stay close to home, I enrolled at York University, and I have a double major honors degree in psych and phys ed. So in those days, phys ed is now like what we would say kinesiology, and really allowed me to explore that love of human biology and anatomy and physiology. I was just thrilled to be studying those things as well. You had the opportunity to spend a lot of time in physical activity. And I'd always been a little bit of a tomboy and an athlete growing up. So that fit very well. And I loved all my psych classes too, just that sort of the human side of our natures. And then of course, a little bit of my dad's influence being a family doctor. I had worked for a time supporting him in his office as well, just doing receptionist sort of duties, but you do get a bit of exposure to patients that way. And so as I was going through my bachelor's degree, I really started to think that maybe medicine was a good path for me and could blend the love that I have of psychology plus the human sciences. So it took me a couple of times before I got interviews for medical school, and I was registered to do my master's degree in neuromuscular physiology at York University, and then I got accepted into medical school. So my graduate supervisor was a tad disappointed in me. However, I didn't really think twice about which way I wanted to go. And I really had wanted to go to McMaster University. I think, by the time you finish your undergrad, you have a sense of how you learn best. And I was very, very excited about McMaster in those days, knowing, for its innovation in undergraduate medical education, small group learning, tutor-based, problem-based learning. I really wanted that. And so I was very thrilled to be offered a spot. So I came to McMaster in 1984, and I have never left. So after I finished my MD, of course, then to be able to practice as a physician, you have to have more training. You can go into family medicine or into a specialty, although back in the day, because that was a really long time ago, you could do general practice with just a year of internship. But while I was a medical student, I did electives in surgery, and there was no turning back for me once I'd been exposed to surgical specialties, and also to the really phenomenal surgical educators at McMaster. I knew that I wanted to go into surgery and I wanted to stay at McMaster. And luckily I was admitted into the general surgery training program in 1987. And subsequently, I did after 5 years of general surgery training, then I did a specialty in critical care, which allowed me to really follow through also on the love I have for internal medicine. So I sort of wanted to do it all, general surgery, plus be able to do acute care and internal medicine practice through critical care, which was really phenomenal. And so I did that as a combined program. So I stayed at Mac for that. And I had always planned previously that I would go back home to Toronto. That was where most of my family was and still is. So I, though, got a job offer here at Mac as assistant professor, and was the first female to be hired in the general surgery division in the city. And by the time I had been here now for several years in Hamilton and just fallen in love with Hamilton, it's a fantastic city. And I didn't miss the traffic in Toronto at all. So I stayed and progressed through the ranks. So I became full professor, and then eventually became the chair of the department after having lots of different leadership positions in the department. And again, became, had a few firsts. So I was the first female to be a chair of a department of surgery in Canada. And is really an important milestone, I think, for McMaster, I think for surgery in Canada, but also in North America. At the time I was appointed, I was the 4th female chair in North America. So, we have 17 medical schools here in Canada, but there's 193 schools in the US. Now there's about 24 chairs that are female, and quite a number like myself who have now they're chair emeriti, as we say. So, that's, I think it really speaks, to the need that we have for women in academic sciences, including academic medicine. The need is great. And it's been quite a ride, I tell you. Very interesting and very satisfying career. But again, I just want to read it. There's lots of ups and downs, and if, things hadn't happened the way they did, who knows, I could still be, teaching junior kindergarten or something. And I'm sure that life would have been fine. And everybody has those moments in life where you're not sure that, the paths are diverging. And sometimes you get pushed down one path because of life circumstances, and that's okay. And many times you can circle back to things. It's, life is funny that way. So eventually I think we all get to where we're supposed to be. Yeah. So I'm happy to answer more questions later, but that's my training in a nutshell.
Well, some really interesting points made about that careers really aren't linear. And also, I think it's been really interesting to hear from you all that there were people that influenced your career, and perhaps your career has influenced the careers of other people, in particular other women. So our second question is, what are some of the greatest obstacles you have faced during your education and or career? And what do you wish you had known then that you know now?
So these are obstacles just in general, or obstacles because I'm a woman? So I just want to clarify what kind of obstacles are you asking about? I know it's International Women's Day weekend, month or whatever, so I just want to make sure.
You want to get specific on that account and you have a specific story you'd like to share, I'm sure that would be great to hear as well.
Okay. So I guess if I think of obstacles, I would say that interestingly, I guess the first point I want to make, so kind of like what Susan said, is that ultimately you're going to end up where you're supposed to be, because actually similar to Susan, when I was finishing my undergrad, as I said, my mom was diagnosed in November with ovarian cancer, and then she actually died 5 days before my convocation in May. And so I had applied to med school and grad school, and the thought of going to med school was like, no way. The thought of him seeing sick patients and being in the hospital just was not something I wanted to do. But I'd applied to both, got accepted at UBC. Again, no internet, no email, no nothing. So I packed up and moved. And my father also made it clear, he's like, this was a shock because my mom obviously died quite young. And so he's like, you better become self-sufficient. So, so med school. So then it was weird. It was almost just like Susan. About a week or so into graduate school, I got a call saying I got into med school at U of T. And I was like, oh, gosh, no, I don't want to go. But I also didn't want to make a decision rashly. And so this isn't really an obstacle, it's just a story I'm telling. But basically what happened is I asked if I could defer it for a year, just so that I could think, because I was still pretty emotionally raw. And the secretary or the woman that called just refused to let me defer. And I think I wasn't explaining it well enough. This was also in the early 80s. So, and I definitely wasn't assertive enough or confident enough to insist on speaking to someone with more authority. And so I just said, you know what, just give it to the next person on the list. Like, I just can't right now. And so, I don't regret not going to med school, because as I said, I never really kind of wanted to go. My family was kind of pushing me because I was going to be just like Rebecca, the first in my family to go to university. And for anyone out there that's from a racialized community, if you're the first, they want you to be pretty much become a lawyer, engineer, or doctor. So, they were like, okay, she's good at science, so she better be a doctor on behalf of the whole family kind of thing. So, I would say that, and that decision was also, I think, made in part because I came from a low income family, and I knew that to go to med school was going to be an incredible obstacle financially. I wasn't a Canadian student, I was an international student. So I think all of those factors played into my decision to just, suggest that they give it to the next person, who I would love to know who that person was that got into med school at U of T that year. But yeah, so that I would say was probably an obstacle in a way, but it wasn't something that I ever felt bitter or angry about. And I would say the rest of grad school was fine. I wouldn't say I had any obstacles per se. I never thought about gender or race in grad school. It's honestly only when I went to do my postdoc in the States that I was confronted with race issues. And then when I moved back to Canada to become a professor, that's when I would say I encountered obstacles as a woman and as a Black woman. And I was shocked because I thought, definitely I had this idea that I was raised to believe that if you have an education, you can do anything regardless of your race, your gender, your socioeconomic status. And I believed it. And so I was completely shocked when I became a professor and then encountered certain racist and sexist behaviors from professors of all people, and from students. Like, I would get evaluations that were just incredibly horrible. And so I found that I definitely had to work a lot harder to almost prove that I was worthy to be a professor at McMaster, which was, when you think about it, is absolutely disgusting that you have to do that. But so I would say the obstacles then were overcoming, for me, the obstacles were mainly overcoming stereotypes. I think more so than anything else. So, and definitely as well, like when my grants are reviewed, so for me, I think the bigger obstacles are people seeing me as a, just like it was earlier session this morning, we were talking, Laura, Dr. Parker was talking about being a young professor and being told you should dress a certain way to get the respect of students. So in my case, I was young, female, Black, and it was like, You know, the students, for many of them, had never, ever had a Black professor, far less a Black high school teacher or elementary teacher. And they obviously thought that I was a token hire or something. And so many students were very disrespectful in my first few years as a prof. They would write absolutely horrific teaching evaluations, and, you know, and everyone would just say to me, oh, don't worry about it. And I'm thinking, but you guys aren't being traumatized as white colleagues. And they all brushed it off, that I should just suck it up and, you know, and recognize that it's the students and it's not me. And again, now in hindsight, when I reflect on all these things, that was not appropriate, and definitely wasn't very supportive to just tell the only Black female professor in the Faculty of Science that she should just ignore what the students were saying, right? Like, when you think about it, it's pretty unfortunate. So I would say that my biggest obstacles have been stereotypes by others in the academy more than anything else. Yeah.
Again, I don't know how I could possibly follow that. I think I've been
We'll switch next time, Rebecca. You can go first.
well, I don't know. I like that you get to go first and you can pave the way for the rest of us. I've been really lucky in that I don't think I've had, like, I've tried to think really hard about some of the obstacles that I may have encountered. And every time I think about one of the challenges that I had, or one of the hardships, like my field site falling through and arriving on the doorstep of the museum and nobody knows I'm coming, that sort of stuff. None of that really mattered in the long run, because it actually ended up opening doors for other really cool things that I did. So I can't really, the things that at the time felt so devastatingly terrible and challenging, and like these huge obstacles that if you put me back in that week, in that moment, I was just crushed. Now they don't seem that bad. And now they seem to have kind of shaped where I've ended up today. So obstacles now, I think, in my life would be more work-life balance type things. And I'm sure that all of the women on this panel probably can relate to that to some extent. Is that I find that I really like my work. I really like doing what I do. And often I found that for my entire career, for my educational career, my undergrad, even in high school, I was always the student that chose to focus on their studies rather than going out and having fun or going and trying something new. Is that I wanted to make sure that I had the grades to get me to the next step, that I had then the grades and the, you know, various accomplishments and achievements to get me to that next step and get me into grad school or get me a job or all of these sorts of things. And I think now I'm realizing more than ever the real importance of managing that balance between accomplishing what we want to do in our career, but also making time for ourselves, for our partners, for our friends, for our families, and especially for ourselves, to do the things that we like to do, to have hobbies and have interests and have things that are bigger and outside our work. So I know, like, in the last couple of years, I've taken up horseback riding again, and I taught myself how to knit and, you know, these sorts of things, just to make sure that I'm having some balance. That said, my job, I feel, sometimes can be really, really busy, and that remains this obstacle of always having something to do. And so I've tried to, because I do a lot of education, a lot of teaching, and I've tried to change my courses around and build my courses into like creative outlets, so that I get to have fun and I get to like play games and make things and teach things in a way that I still feel like I'm not really working, and that I think that my students feel, hopefully, like they're not really working all that hard. In one of my first year courses, we're doing an unessay. I don't know if any of you know what that is. It's where you, instead of writing an essay, you develop an academic question or a topic, and you present it in like a science communication way, but in any medium that you want. You could knit something, you could cross stitch something. I had a group of students do a radio play, and they looked at human evolution from, you know, proto-primates to modern times in a radio play. It was so engaging and so interesting and creative. And so although I might not always master that work-life balance, I'm trying to like bring the fun bits into my work to make it more enjoyable, so that I can kind of overcome that obstacle of feeling like I'm always working. I could probably talk a little bit about sexism in archaeology and on archaeological field sites, but that might be a conversation for another day and time. It's rampant, it's problematic. And I think as archaeologists and as women in general, we're probably going to encounter it in all of our fields. But I think I'll leave it there for now. I'll pass it off to Janet.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. So I was thinking about a couple of different obstacles, and one is kind of related to what Juliet was mentioning regarding teaching evaluation. So I'll get there at the end, but I thought this would be maybe valuable for some of you guys to hear, because some of you may be interested in grad school, or you're interested in pursuing some kind of professional school or something after McMaster or after your undergrad, and you're not exactly sure of where that will lead to. And that's very common in grad school, because it's like you jump into this program and you don't have an end career that you're going to be plopped into, and it takes lots of digging. And what I had done in grad school was informational interviewing to try to figure out what career I would actually land into after grad school. And I found that, like Rebecca was saying, I was also very fortunate going through grad school. I felt supported by my parents financially, because you don't make a lot of money as a grad student. Thankfully, you do make some, but you basically just kind of live at that low income status for 5 to 6 years of your life. And those 5 to 6 years of your life, it might be a point in time in your life when you want other life things to be happening. So one of the obstacles I was continuously faced with during grad school was not financially related. It was more just related to questions that I would continuously get from my family. And they weren't malicious. I think that they were just curious, because they had no idea what kinds of careers could come after grad school. I also, I was the first of my family to go to grad school and to pursue a PhD, and a lot of people did not know what that meant. I also I was in my 20s going through grad school, and a lot of my friends were getting married and buying homes and starting families. And here I was living, I don't know if many of you guys know this intersection, Charlton and Locke Street, right by the bread bar. I lived in a tall columnar house right at the top floor, a 1-bedroom flat. I actually had to duck to get into my bathroom because it was such a small little place. And so I was observing my friends, good friends, high school friends, going off and getting married and buying homes. And here I was choosing a path that was really unusual to them and unusual to my family. And of course, as women, we do have to think about, it is the crude reality that we need to think about of the choices that we're making earlier in life. Does that impact our biological clocks and ability to have a family? And I think we are learning more about women freezing their eggs and choosing, to devote time to their careers in order to allow them to have families later on in life. But some people don't have the privilege to do that. That costs a lot of money. And some people, that's just not their choice either. So I was faced with the obstacle of choosing education and choosing to devote time to my career, which I still didn't know exactly what it was going to be when I was going through grad school. And so continuously going out to, engagements with friends and family and getting asked, well, when are you going to actually get a job and start your life? That was really challenging to do for about 5 or 6 years, enduring those questions, and then, going to weddings and being bridesmaids, but never the bride. Some of you guys might think some of these things are a little bit trivial, but as you get a bit older, experience your 20s and 30s, you may have the desires to start a family and settle down, so to speak. So that was one thing that I kind of was continuously faced with. And luckily I had my parents were so open to me doing whatever I wanted to do. And while they would pepper me with questions over dinner, it was always from a kind place, and it wasn't malicious, and they weren't trying to convince me to do something else. So they were always very open and wanting me to pursue what I wanted to do and what made me happy. And the other thing that I think that the obstacle has been, and I started teaching in 2012. So I took my first sessional course when I was 27 years old. and that was at the University of Guelph-Humber. And I remember really struggling with that first course. I was so excited going in, and I had all these huge ideas, and I really wanted to excite the students. And I remember getting my first course evaluations back and reading a comment about my behind, my butt, in my course evaluations. And I have to mention it because I think it's very relevant to the conversation these days, and it happens. And I thought to myself, I wonder how many middle-aged men would get that comment. Now, some might, but, and it wasn't one comment. And I thought, you know, I've worked so darn hard and given up so much of personal life to pursue this career and earning a doctorate and going and doing a postdoc fellowship and all of this and gaining all this knowledge, spending time on Friday nights writing manuscripts instead of going out. And that's the kind of comment that you get or that I got. And it was really devastating. And in addition to kind of just trying to rethink about how to use that feedback, I've tried to just kind of make my shell a little bit harder because I am a bit of a sensitive person as well. So obviously I'm at teaching faculty. So every year I get 6 rounds of teaching evaluations come into my inbox, sometimes late at night. And I advise anyone, do not read feedback late at night. Grant feedback, paper feedback, teaching evaluations, just don't do it. You know, wait until the morning and until you're supported by people that you love, so you can turn to them for a hug or something like that. But even in a job, you know, you're going to get feedback from your supervisor, and sometimes it's not going to be what you expect. So I've tried to build up a bit of a harder shell, and just, I guess, also tried to seek feedback in a different way from students, so that I don't get this kind of crushing experience at the end of the semester. And I do still get comments about what I wear, about my voice, about my hair. What else have I gotten recently? Yeah, whole host of those. And so I have to just kind of laugh them off. And I've taught myself how to do that a little bit. And my husband also has started screening some of the course evaluations that come in. If I start to notice some comments that are a little bit iffy, you know, and I think that that's important to have people in your life that you can kind of say, okay, I need to lean on you right now because of this. So I would say that those are a couple of the obstacles I've faced, and I don't think I've shared that with many other students. So hopefully, if you've had me before, maybe that's a new nugget of information.
Wow, I'm not sure that I have too much more original to add to obstacles to my career. You know, obstacles come in so many different forms. There's the cultural, societal norms that's, you know, that would, you know, subject us to gender bias and racial bias and those sort of things. And, you know, I could probably write a book on gender bias and my experiences. If you can imagine being a female surgical resident in the 1980s, and then being the only female general surgeon, working constantly, always with men, and all the way through my whole career, subject to obvious gender bias. So I think, you know, there's that type of bias. There's bias just of, you know, or obstacles of circumstance, things that we have no control over. And then there's also, I'll just touch on, you know, there's obstacles of a more personal nature and confidence obstacles, and, you know, making sure that you do the things that help you keep your confidence and your ability to say yes to opportunities, and also your ability to know when to say no. And that pertains to finding that balance. Again, all right, I can write the book on having no balance in your life. Being in undergrad from the time I was 17 and finishing my training when I was 31, that's a decade and a half almost of having absolutely nothing else really in my life. Even my husband says that he doesn't think we've really been married as long as we have been, because for 6 years I was a surgical resident and it didn't count. So, you know, and I definitely have had opportunities that I know would have been different if I had more confidence in my own abilities. So yeah, there's just lots of different obstacles that I think it's just good to know that they're there, and to try and label them, and to, you know, I think awareness goes a long way to overcoming them. And that's, you know, with respect to gender bias. If you'd asked me a decade ago if I was subject to gender bias when I was a med student or a surgical resident, I would say, no, I don't think so. Because I wasn't educated enough to even recognize it and to understand what I had experienced. So I think it is good to acknowledge these things and to become educated about the different obstacles and biases that you can be subject to, but you can also, you know, be partner to as well. So I'll stop there.
Thank you for being so open with us, all of our panelists, about your personal obstacles and also the ones that are based in institutionalized barriers like racism and sexism that clearly need to be addressed on a larger scale. With that, I'm going to pass it on to my co-host Manisha, who will ask the next few questions.
Okay, so my next question is, do you have any remaining career aspirations and what will you do next?
Okay, remaining career aspirations. So as I said, remember when I was a teenager in my lovely low-income family in Barbados, I wanted to do research that would have a global impact and get a Nobel Prize. So that's still my aspiration. Not sure how we're going to get there, but you know, wasn't sure how I would even get here. So I'm just trusting the universe and trusting God to do whatever needs to be done. My other aspiration was to, whatever research I was doing was to basically give back to Barbados and the Caribbean. And so one of my aspirations was to basically head and be the director of a Caribbean Research Institute. And that is actually possibly something I might actually achieve in the next 5 years. So we'll see if that pans out or not. But I'm definitely working towards helping create a research institute in the Caribbean. So I'm working with others to establish something like that. Whether I become the director will be a different story, but I'm definitely working towards establishing such a facility in the Caribbean and in Barbados. And my other aspiration that because I love kids and I don't have any, but my other teenage aspiration was always to open a daycare center that was not going to be just a place where kids came up. But pardon?
I could work there.
But to be something that was really kind of like Rebecca saying, like to be something so innovative that it wasn't just about, I don't know, I had this dream of just having this incredible daycare center for kids. So that's something else I've always wanted to do and I might still do, who knows? Yeah, I have lots of ideas of things I want to do still, so yeah.
That all sounds so awesome. I'm still pretty new in my career. And so I finished my PhD in 2017 and I'm new in this assistant professor role. So currently my career aspirations are very much focused on making sure that I earn tenure and get to stay in my job, which would be amazing. But what I really want to do and some of the things that I'm working on is developing projects, because I know I've said that I'm an archaeologist, a bioarchaeologist, I focus on really, really old dead people. I'm developing projects now that are focused on more modern living humans so that I can start to accumulate similar knowledge to what I'm asking in the past, but in ways that's maybe more applicable to modern medicine, to physiotherapy in particular, how people are recovering from and responding to their injuries. So I think while my current aspirations are, I'm not thinking too long term, I'm thinking, you know, get tenure, be allowed to stay, and then move forward a little bit further. I really want to make sure that I'm creating projects for my students and for myself that contribute to dialogues concerning modern humans and modern human health. And then that also informs, you know, people in the past, and then hopefully taking some of that information from how people in the past worked to respond to their various pathological conditions to help inform how we might treat things currently. Because with my ancient Romans, their response to a broken leg was something very, very different than our modern living human response to a broken leg. And from the things that I'm finding is that they're not losing any bone consequently. They're just kind of they're healing and then getting on with it, which I think is a response that we don't necessarily always adopt. Being a person that's had many broken legs over various years, I know that I like to lay on the couch for as long as possible before I move forward. And I think it could be interesting to see what the past can tell us about our present. So future projects.
All right. Yeah, so like Rebecca, I'm still pretty new in my career, and my aspirations are just like hers to make sure I just do a good job and provide a lot of good learning experiences for the students so that I can earn a permanent position. And so that's on my mind a lot. But one way that I feel I get invigorated in my job is by trying to think of how I can kind of mix up the classroom experience and make more experiences that are real and authentic for students, and that get students into the community. Over the past few years, I've dabbled in some volunteer experiential learning projects with Hamilton City Housing. And I got a lot out of those experiences because I got to talk to people who are living in these subsidized facilities in really awful conditions. And I got to drag my students with me into some of these situations. Some of them were uncomfortable. We spotted cockroaches in some of the facilities and odd smells, and came across, interesting people. And I just want to continue to try to find those opportunities and to engage my students in those opportunities as well, and provide them as options for my students, because I think we all become better when we have those kinds of experiences and interact with people who are unlike us. And so that's something that I'm kind of really excited about trying to continue to do in the life science program. And I actually, at the end of every calendar year, we have to submit something called the record of activities at MAC. I know you probably love that, right, Juliet? Susan, I'm not sure if you have to do that, but
Very similar. Yeah.
Where, yeah, you kind of reflect on everything you've done in 2020 and then propose some plans for 2021. And I had this huge list of different research opportunities that I wanted to explore as well, but trying to find that balance with research and teaching as the teaching faculty is really challenging. But I would love to continue to do some of the work that I started in my postdoc and explore the relationship between diabetes and frailty and sarcopenia with some of the endocrinologists at MAC. And I'm also really passionate. I just saw my dad go through 3 joint replacement surgeries in about a year and a half, 2 during the pandemic. And so that was really traumatizing. But seeing the impact of that major surgery, and Susan, you can probably just really relate with this, seeing the impact of 3 orthopedic surgeries on his overall health and mobility has inspired me to try to think about how can we optimize the health of people going in for those major surgeries. But now it's a bit of a balancing act because I'm passionate about that, but I'm also very passionate about teaching, and that's where my job is. So I'd love to explore some of those research opportunities, but it's about finding that balance. And then in the immediate time, I am wanting to try to get back into the gym and coach basketball in some capacity, because that's something I love to do previously and just haven't been able to find the time to do that again. So I'd love to do that. And I'm also working on a crochet art wall hanging right now. So these are kind of immediate, kind of fun aspirations that I'm trying to tap into to keep me sane during the pandemic.
Wow, that's so interesting to hear all of that. So in terms of my career aspirations, I'm really at this bit of a pivot point in my career. Having just finished being the academic chair of the department, I still remain full professor and still am active clinically, but in a little bit of a different role, doing more assisting now, and still have some research and educational responsibilities as well. And whether, I'm just trying to sort out in my own mind whether or not I have the capacity and interest to look at other leadership positions in academic medicine. And I need a little bit of time to think about that. I need a bit of breathing space. I have another sort of side career as well. I am the medical director for a private endoscopy clinic. And so that occupies quite a bit of my time. We have a private operating room, so we run cosmetic surgery there as well. And it's a growing business. And so, I am aspiring to be a little better of a businesswoman, and everything that goes into running a clinic, it's a big venture. So I hope I can continue to learn in that realm and develop that way. And I, had a few small opportunities while I was chair of the department to be involved in global health initiatives, and did have one trip to Uganda. And we have a pretty strong surgical focus on international and global surgery. And so I'm hoping now, if I have a little more time, that I'll be able to re-engage into that. I think that that's a huge opportunity for our department to continue to strive and bring, what we can to developing countries, particularly around training and helping them with their training programs. I think as we've seen before, where we've brought residents from other countries and have them trained, and then they take that knowledge and skill and confidence back to their home countries. And it's really amazing to see then what they can accomplish. So I know that, it's when we go over there as well to support them in developing their own training programs, so that many of them are getting to the point where they don't necessarily have to come over here, they can do that themselves. So I'd like to try and dedicate a little more time to that if I can find it. And my other aspiration is to finish a piece on the piano that I've been teaching myself for the last year. It's playing the piano was something I did when I was a child and as a teenager, and then it kind of went by the wayside for many, many years. And last year I bought myself a new piano, and so I picked up an old rock and roll song that was one of my favorites, and an Aerosmith song. You might have heard of it, and it's called Dream On. It's a pretty complicated composition. So if I can finish that, that would be really something. That's it.
Those are some really cool aspirations. And now for our last question, what is some advice you can give to someone who's having difficulty planning their career?
I'm not sure I'm the best person because I didn't really plan. Like, I just had the end goal, which was, as I said, to do research with global impact. So it could have been in diabetes, heart disease, right? I didn't have an actual plan to be a cancer biologist. So I think my advice would be to have an end goal, and that end goal should be a noble goal. It shouldn't be just about making money or just about having a job, but have a goal that basically is purposeful, because if you have that purpose, that will help you overcome any obstacle you encounter, because you know that that's the goal. It's like running a marathon, right? Like you know the end goal is 42 kilometers away, and you just take it one step at a time. And so I would say just focus on the end goal and build your network, and make sure you have enough mentors and advocates that will support you on your journey, and a support system, because none of us got here on our own, like not one of us. And anyone that thinks they did it on their own is possibly delusional or super, super, super arrogant. But I don't think any of us got here on our own. And so if you come from a small family, or you just don't have a lot of family here, or your family doesn't support your dreams and aspirations, then you should build a community of support where people really see your potential, they buy into your vision and your dream, and they will encourage you to get there. As I said, like, my family really wanted me to become a physician, and they were all very disappointed when I didn't go to med school, but they were really excited once they realized that with a PhD I would still have the title doctor, right? And for them it was just more about knowing that their relative, and and my dad couldn't care two hoots what I became, which is awesome, and I love that about him. Like, he genuinely didn't care what I became, he just wanted me to be happy and do what was good for me. But most of my family really wanted me to be a doctor, and my extended family, I should say. And so I think that just making sure you have people that support your dreams and aspirations. I never had anyone telling me I couldn't do something. I've never, thankfully, luckily, never had any family member tell me that. And so I think that's one of those things that unconsciously I didn't even realize that no one was ever telling me that. I always had people supporting me. which I think helped me to overcome obstacles when I encountered them, because I knew that there were tons of people supporting me and backing me and praying for me on a regular basis that I would succeed. So yeah, I think that would be my advice, is not to literally, don't sweat it, just have your goal and then just kind of go with the flow. Yeah.
I think that's great advice. And mine is, I think, quite similar in a little bit of a different way. I was one of those people that always knew what I wanted to do. I was going to be an archaeologist, and I had one waffle point at one point where I thought, no, I'm actually going to be a paleontologist. I'll study dinosaurs instead. So in terms of my career projection, I was always kind of laser focused on my end goal. But I think the thing that helped me along the way was building those networks. And in my case, it was getting involved and volunteering and making sure that I was present and available. Like if somebody, I know I'm a bit different because I'm the archaeologist on the panel. But in my undergrad, if I was in the department and if I just happened to be writing my paper at the end of the hall or whatever, and a PhD student needed somebody to come out on the weekend to bail his units out of water because they'd all flooded and he needed to keep excavating, I just happened to be there and I was eager and ready to go. And I think those opportunities have really helped me build these networks to always be working with people, and not because of what they could do for me later, just because of the interests that we all share and the experiences that we gathered. And I know I said earlier I worked really hard and I felt like I sacrificed some social time because of it. A lot of that work was kind of social time, in that it was spent doing excavation or screening things for people, or I did a bunch of illustration for somebody just because I knew how to do archaeological illustration and they needed an illustrator, and I felt, okay, why not? So I seized opportunities that helped me build support systems, and without even thinking of it, or never thinking that our paths would cross again. Our paths have crossed. I have crossed paths with these people a number of times since, and we've all ended up in different places, but it's been really wonderful and helpful along the way. Like Juliet said, having that support system and having that network of people with sort of similar aspirations or similar interests, or people that have kind of known you along your journey and supported you along your journey. I think that's really important.
That's really great advice. I'll just build on that quickly with two pieces of advice that I have. So unlike Juliet and Rebecca, I did not know exactly what my career was going to be. As I told you, I was in my fourth year of my undergrad. I was volunteering in a kindergarten classroom. I think I mentioned that. And I was completing a thesis in a rat lab where we were looking at leptin resistance with a high-fat diet. So I was massively confused. And so I didn't really know exactly what I was going to be. And so I didn't have that goal that I could write down and then, do what I had to do to get to that goal. One thing that I just kept having in my mind, and this is something that really motivated me through grad school, was I had to just keep doing things that made me happy or that made me feel good or feel okay. Because I had no other real direction other than just the feeling that I got. So in grad school, I had the opportunity to collect bone samples from people undergoing joint replacement, and I got to stand in the operating rooms. And I thought that that was really cool because I got to watch the joint replacement surgeries and collect the bone and then do some cool scientific analyses on them. And that just made me feel good. And then talking to my participants and learning about their stories and learning about the impact of disease on their life, that just made me feel good inside. And I actually gained friendships with people through those participant interactions. So I just was motivated to do things that made me feel good and made me feel happy. And I think, today when there are a lot of options for careers out there for science students, I try to, suggest to my students, just boil it down to make sure you're doing something that makes you happy. And the moment you feel like, this is not quite doing it for me, then that's when you have to kind of sit down. And I often use like concept maps and vision boards to try to get my students to think about what does make them happy and to try to connect the dots. What else was I going to mention? I think that's probably it. That's pretty simple advice that might frustrate some of you because it's not, a list or anything like that. But, when you're feeling stressed and anxious and not sure what you're going to do with your life, just try to pursue things that make you happy, and you will arrive in a position that gives you some feelings of happiness in the end. And ultimately, that's what we all want, right? We all want to have a happy life on this earth. So that's it for me.
Wow, that's all such great, fantastic advice. I guess the only thing that I would maybe stress to add is that, you know, lots of people have so many talents that they can be very good at lots of different jobs. And so it can be, if you don't have that laser focus that you've always known that you're going to win the Nobel Prize, and I believe you will win it. So if you haven't had that, then you could, you know, it can be sometimes hard to try and sort out where your passion lies. And so it can sometimes be really helpful to reach out, and other people have said, like, find mentors or but even doesn't have to be someone who's going to be like a long-term official mentor. Just make an appointment or send an email to say, can I chat with you for 5 minutes about your career? And listen to what that person does, and why does it make them happy, and have they been satisfied, and why did they pick it? And then you can see if that kind of starts to resonate with yourself. Like, oh, yes, that's, you know, because you will find conversations where you're like, oh yeah, no, that's not what I thought it would be like to, you know, be a whatever. But this sounds really cool. And it may not be exactly the same thing, but it might be, you know, the overall, like whether you want to do research or whether you want to be in education or just help you focus a little bit. So just reach out. I know there is not one faculty member I know at this university that wouldn't be thrilled to sit down and give advice and to chat with students to help them sort things out. People are very, very accommodating to students to help them. So I would just say never hesitate to reach out. That's it.
Thank you for that. Because of the time, we're going to open the floor up to any questions that anyone may have for the panelists. So feel free to type it up in the chat box or react or raise your hand up so we can show your screen.
We'll give those a few minutes to come in. And I believe now all the attendees should have all their functions back. So if you want to raise your hand as well, that's perfectly appropriate.
Everyone's shy.
No.
Yeah, this happened. I listened into one of the morning sessions as well, and it took a while for the students to warm up.
Oh, there's somebody's got something.
Just typing it.
I guess while we wait on that question, I'm wondering, in just a few words, if you weren't doing what you're doing now, what do you think you would have chosen?
Oh. One of the things that I think I've always thought about is maybe a physiotherapist, because you're self-employed kind of, sort of, and you're constantly interacting with people, and pretty much all your clients love you. Like, because you're basically healing them, right? Like, you're very seldom giving bad news like a physician might have to do on occasion, right? And it's something that I think it's a career that's I'm not sure estimated, but a lot of students don't know about as a viable career. And it's also a career that's very portable around the world. You can be a physiotherapist anywhere in the world. So it's very, very portable and very fulfilling. So that's something that I always think about, I guess, as a career that I might have pursued if I didn't go down the research route.
I was always so laser focused. I like in grade 8, we had to do these career and personal planning presentations about what we wanted to be when we grew up. And I did mine on how to be an archaeologist. And I had like an overhead slide where I'd drawn like a trowel and a paintbrush, and I taught them all how to excavate. So I never like, it crossed my mind, especially during my PhD and when I was on the job market, like what, if I can't do this, what am I gonna do? But I always just kind of told myself, we'll give it another year, like just, just let's see what happens and stuff. So I never, like, Juliet, your idea about physiotherapist, I mean, that would make sense for me. I also sometimes wondered about the medical field, but honestly, I'm quite happy with skeletal remains because there's no squishy things and smelly things and stuff. So I don't think, like, even though a physician, that sort of thing had crossed my mind, and I think orthopedic surgery would be so interesting, I don't know if I could do like the soft tissue part of things. Like, there's a very specific reason why I like the dry bone remains. So I'm sorry I don't have a good answer for that.
I think we're going to move on and read some questions from the chat
Yeah.
for the sake of time. Oh, sorry, Dr. Daniel, what were you saying?
I was saying there's a bunch of questions now.
Yes, we're now overloaded with questions and underloaded with time. Okay, let's see. Jennifer asks, have you experienced a situation where your path was taking you in one direction, but then a really cool opportunity came your way to take you in another direction, but that could derail your initial plans?
Are we answering in order, or should we just jump in?
Let's just jump in for the sake of time.
Okay. I did. I wanted to do a PhD, and I did do a PhD eventually, but an opportunity came around that they needed an archaeologist out in the field in Oman, in the Arabian Peninsula, and they needed them there next week, but they didn't know how long the project was going to last. And I was like, oh, that sounds neat. It doesn't pay, but they pay my flights, they pay my accommodation, they pay my food. And I just went for it. So yes, it had the potential to derail my career because I might not have been back in time had I been accepted for a PhD program, but I just kind of went for it because the opportunity sounded so unique that I figured I was just going to jump on it. I was going to try and do this thing for a year. Maybe I was going to meet some people that were going to help me in the later stages of my career. It might mean not doing my PhD that year. It might mean deferring if that was even a possibility. I didn't really know. I just kind of went for it.
Okay, I think we'll move on. We'll do one more and close out in the next 2 minutes. Let's see what we have here. Tips on how to reach out to professors to participate in their lab during undergrad. What would you recommend?
I can answer this one quickly, just provide a couple pieces of advice, or maybe one, actually. This is one that I've told the students before. We, as professors, we see a lot of emails, and we see a lot of the same looking emails. I don't know if the others can agree with this or not, but it seems like there's some kind of format that has been suggested to students, to say something like, we've read your paper and we think it's really interesting, and I would like to volunteer in your lab, and I've got a lot of skills to offer. And I think that that's a very polite email. But when we're getting multiple emails that look exactly the same, yes, I see Juliet nodding her head. It's almost like you kind of glaze over a little bit. So when I'm thinking about the students that I've invited to come work with me, I actually am more triggered and sparked by more personal emails, and less canned emails, less perfect emails. And that might be against some kind of advice that's being put out there by other faculty, because I'm getting these kind of perfect emails. But I'm saying kind of do away with that and get personal. And if you don't know what you want to do, then you can say that in your email. But you'd be willing to kind of work really hard and learn a lot of things, and that you love learning and love science. Some of those things might actually strike a chord with profs more than, I've read your paper and I think it's really interesting, and tell me more about the analysis. So that's just something that I find. I am more likely to get in touch with students who are just more candid and personal in those emails. I might be on my own on that one, but I don't know if the others have any feedback on that.
No, I agree. I tend to reply to the emails that talk about, like, students would email and say, you know, I'm really interested in cancer research because a family member or my best friend. So usually, as you said, it's those personal stories, and then and for me, I'll be honest, it's also about when you send that email. If you send that email super late at night, or like, it's literally all about timing. If it happens to be at the top of my email thread when I get up in the morning, I'm more likely to reply. Like, it's, for me, it's bad, right? But I just know. So, because people are like, wow, that was a quick response. And I'm like, I just finished a meeting and checked my email and yours was at the top. It's not because there's no other reason, right? So it's just something as well to think about when you send emails to professors. Like, I tell my students, you never send an email first thing on a Monday or last thing on a Friday, because, like, you know, so you need to think about when would be a good time to send an email to a professor. Yeah.
I am going to have to cut us off there for time. I wanted to thank all of our panelists for coming and sharing your inspiring stories and your advice for career aspirations. Thank you very much. And to all of our attendees who want to attend our final conference keynote with Dr. Don Bodish, I would definitely recommend it. The link is in the chat, or you can find it in the email you may have received. So we're going to end off there. Thanks very much for coming, everyone.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.